As I've mentioned in previous videos, last night, Republicans barely succeeded in impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas by the margin of a single vote, and in an effort that is almost certainly doomed to failure because 2/3 of the Senate is required to convict and remove him, and that's not going to happen. Despite that, the Fox propaganda network is working overtime to try to hype this up as a major Republican victory. But unfortunately for them, liberal commentator Jessica Tarlov is back on at the 5, and she delightfully pours cold water on the political cope coming from her right-wing co-hosts, and it was glorious. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play in this video, but I want to play first, obviously, the triumphant return of Jessica Tarlov, who is pregnant and was absent for the past several weeks on the 5. She is back with a vengeance. And despite the best efforts of her right-wing, Trump-loving Republican co-host to try to hype this up, she comes armed with the facts and the receipts, and it's not good for them.
A lot to say. And Jessica, you were away last week. It's great to have you back around the table. What about somebody like a John Tester, Bob Casey, Sherrod Brown, even Tammy Baldwin? Those are tough Senate races for those Democrats, and they'll be looking at this.
They will be, absolutely. And there has already been tougher talk on the border. I think John Fetterman's kind of been leading the way, saying, it doesn't make you less of a patriot. It doesn't make you less of an American, less of a Democrat to say that we have a border crisis, and you should absolutely accept that. Ken Buck, who was one of only 3 Republicans in the House to vote against impeaching Mayorkas, has a piece in the National Review that's out today, talking about how poor job performance is not an impeachable offense. There is actually a standard that the Constitution lays out: treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors, and that being bad at your job, and he says he's really bad at his job, doesn't meet the threshold. But you are seeing the GOP's focus on this border crisis, which there is a bill. They could pass it, bipartisan bill out of the Senate. Joe Biden wants to sign it. They're paying attention to that. And then Tom Suozzi is winning George Santos' seat last night. And guess what Tom Suozzi did? He ran on closing the border. He's a Democrat, always has been, very successful record, mayor of Glen Cove. Then he was in the House for 3 terms, ran against Kathy Hochul. He was genius about it. He said, you don't have to agree with Joe Biden about everything. It doesn't make you less of a Democrat. He went to his opponent, who was a very strong opponent, I should add, was doing an event at a migrant shelter in Queens. Tom Suozzi showed up, and he took over the cameras, and he started talking about how this is just an American problem. It is the pathway for Democrats to win, and I think you'll see that in these swing districts.
Okay.
But the main message is Democrats continue to overperform in the Joe Biden era, and we're unified. Kathy Hochul, who probably hates Tom Suozzi more than anyone else on the planet for running against her, campaigned for him. Hakeem Jeffries mobilized. AOC came out and said, I'm on the same page as Tom Suozzi. We're in good position.
Judge, anything you want to talk about?
So obviously they want to quickly change the subject, but she's absolutely right. I mean, listen, immigration, as we've discussed, whether we like it or not, whether we think it is justified, right now it is the highest polling concern for most Americans, and Republicans typically enjoy a polling advantage on it. But last night's special election, in which Democrats flipped a Republican seat, further shrinking that narrow Republican majority, giving Democrat Tom Suozzi back the seat that he occupied before George Santos flipped it. So it's been a district which has flipped back and forth. He was able to do some sort of political Aikido and redirect Republican concerns about the border, in large part because people said they wouldn't vote for Republicans given that they played dirty pool on the border, right? That they hype it up as an issue, that they complain about it, but then when the time comes to work bipartisanly to address the issue, they tank it for political reasons. So again, this is a really good opportunity for Democrats to make Republicans play the ultimate political price for their bad faith. And speaking of impeaching Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and the border issue and a shrinking Republican majority, folks, it gets worse. So right about the time of this recording, it was announced that the guy who impeached Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, a Republican named Mark Green, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives, he is retiring. He is retiring, okay? This was just announced. And the quote is absolutely damning. He says, this is what he told Axios. there's also just the frustration of trying to get something done here. This place is so broken, and making a difference here is just, it feels like a lot of something for nothing. Okay, folks, he's leaving, and he's leaving ultimately, even though he won't come out and say this, but you can read between the lines here. If he's complaining about things not getting done, that's because of his party and his leadership and Mike Johnson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump from distant Mar-a-Lago. Because even the Senate, as dysfunctional as it can be, is working relatively bipartisanly. But that's where they are. And he is joining a long list of Republicans who are leaving, right? So folks, the Republican Party is in really bad shape this election cycle. They're already favored to lose the House of Representatives already. And this is just going to make it considerably worse because there goes that incumbency advantage. Okay. I want to play a couple of clips too, in terms of the special election from last night, which Jessica Tarlov pointed out, because it's not just Fox and Friends. It's also other elements of the Fox propaganda network, like the Five, who are desperately trying to come up with excuses for why they lost this election, despite the fact that the previous occupant was a Republican.
On Monday night, Swazi rightfully predicting that early voting would put him over the top. Yesterday's election was a lesson in why the new paradigm of voting early or voting absentee, mail-in ballots is important because as he was just talking about with early voting, according to the New York Times, 80,000 voted early through Sunday and 11,000 more registered Democrats cast votes than the Republicans. Also, there was a big snowstorm and the officials were saying stay off the streets. And maybe some did.
One lady who was trying to vote, she said the roads were horrible. Cars were swerving all over the place. The thing is, most Republicans vote in person. So yesterday, when that snowstorm rolled in, that was probably definitely affected the election. That area is turning more red, and Swazi could be sworn in tomorrow.
Listen, the snow. Do not discount the snow because so many people were saying stay off the streets. The House Republican main super PAC called Congressional Leadership Fund. You know what they did yesterday? According to the New York Times, they hired private snowplows to clear the party's best precinct areas faster. It was so important that people actually get out to vote. And apparently more Democrats got out to vote.
The roads really weren't bad yesterday. They got bad this morning when it got cold.
Even Brian Kilmeade is like, guys, you guys are over the top. We just took the L on this one. As I've said before, the Republican alphabet is indeed 26 letter L's. But again, the COPE, right? They should have enjoyed an advantage here, but they put George Santos in the seat. George Santos was the very embodiment of the modern Republican Party, a liar, a fraud, somebody who's been federally and internationally investigated and indicted. Simon Rosenberg, a Democratic strategist who worked for President Clinton, this is how he summarized the results of the special election yesterday, again, in the aftermath of the border crisis and the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas.
Just to remind everybody, right, we had a great election in 2018 and then a great election in 2020 where we took away the presidency, the Senate, and the House from the Republicans. And then usually what happens is the party in power loses seats, right? You lose midterm elections, you lose these kind of off-year and special elections, and the exact opposite's been happening. Something really dramatic and historic has been happening, which is that we won those races in 2018 and 2020, and now we're winning everything in 2022, 23, and 2024. I mean, there's been a basic fundamental dynamic, in my view, in our politics since the spring of 2022 when Dobbs happened, which is that Democrats keep overperforming expectations and Republicans keep struggling. It's showing up in every kind of race. It's now in 3 different calendar years. It's all over the country. It's the same fundamental dynamic. And it's a central reason why I'm so optimistic about our chances in 2024, because when voters vote, we win. And when voters vote, they lose.
And that's effectively, ironically, in a roundabout way, what Fox and Friends were talking about, the fact that, Republicans, because of decisions they made, the fact that they are so overwhelmingly insistent on voting in person, even though there are numerous legal options for them to do so, via absentee or mail-in ballot, right? Again, these are things that don't inherently advantage Democrats. They advantage Democrats in one of two ways. Number one, because Republicans don't avail themselves of that same option. And number two, simply because Democratic policies are generally more popular, so more people are inclined generally to vote for Democrats, right? But Republicans could fix these things if they moderated, if they became more reasonable, if they offered better policies, if they had a better record to defend, if they had better candidates. So I love Simon Rosenberg's optimism. I wish I shared it, so I constantly listen to him to hype me up. But Morning Joe Scarborough, a lifelong Republican, a former Republican congressman, even though he's now an MSNBC host, he summed it up an even funnier way.
Yeah. I do this. Donald Trump lost in 2007, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and last night. Wow.
Okay.
Great stuff. So yeah, listen, I don't know if this is necessarily a bellwether for the 2024 presidential election. I can't exactly say for certain. And again, I'm kind of a cynic by nature, as you know, if you watch this channel. But this is good. This is really good news. The fact that the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas is not going to go anywhere. You need 2/3 of the Senate to convict and remove. That's not going to happen. So he will remain the Secretary of Homeland Security. The fact that Tom Suozzi won and flipped a Republican seat to the Democrats and also won by tackling the immigration issue. And again, delivering a political victory, showing that Democrats are able to do just that if they work diligently in a unified way. And the fact that, as Jessica Tarlov points out, it demonstrated party unity. The fact that AOC, a New York progressive, went up and campaigned and advocated on Suozzi's behalf, even though he is much more conservative than she. That's good because they understand the importance of electoral victories. And the fact that Mark Green, an incumbent, powerful, influential Republican, is so distraught and is in such despair over the state of his party that he is resigning. All of these are back to back really good news for the Democratic Party and the American people. Let me know what you think in the comments.